What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 317. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line in the fresh new year is Luis Scott-Vargas. Happy New Year, Luis.
Happy New Year, Marshall.
Yay. It's a new year. Is it going to be a good one for LR?
I think so. And like I said a couple days ago, as your birthday present, since your birthday was just a few days ago, this show will have absolutely zero trolls in it.
Yeah, right. You broke that within one day, by the way.
That's not true. The show had not started.
Oh, the show. Oh, I see. All right.
I didn't say the year.
I thought it was going to be about the show, and I got a text message from you the next day that was a troll about the show. So
I said there will be no in the show. It's I don't know, fairly absolute statement.
All right. So we've got one of our favorite type of episodes to do. We've got a sunset show for Battle for Zendikar. It's been around for a while, and it's time to finally put it to rest. Though, we still get to draft Battle for Zendikar cards going forward, and we're going to be going deep on all the fun topics and such for the sunset show. Before we do, though, I want to remind you that the show is brought to you every week by channelfireball.com. And, speaking of transitioning away from Battle for Zendikar and into Oath of the Gatewatch, you can pre-order Oath of the Gatewatch, anything you need right now. Singles, sealed product, fat packs, booster boxes, whatever it is that you need, you can get it at Channel Fireball right now. What you do is you go on CFB, you order it up, and then the first day that they're allowed to ship it to you, it hits the mail, and you're going to get it in your hands ASAP. And that is a great way to make sure that you get all the cards that you want right when you can first get them from Channel Fireball. So go ahead and head over there to check that out and get any of the sweet singles or maybe even get a box pre-ordered so that on that very first day, it'll ship to you and you can do a draft with your friends. I want to also remind you that GP Oakland is coming up pretty soon. It's just a little over a week off now, on the 9th, I believe. And, if you want to come out to it, gpoakland.com is where you go. It's standard. There's going to be a lot of awesome stuff going on there. Some really cool announcements that you can find on gpoakland.com regarding Oath of the Gatewatch, some artists, some other cool stuff there too. So make sure you check that out. Also, I want to thank you, the listener, for supporting the show directly via Patreon. We've got a Patreon giveaway now. Pretty cool here. I got actually a bunch of stuff. I'm still sorting through how to give it away, but Channel Fireball has very generously given us a lot of CFB product to give away to our listeners. We've got deck boxes, life pads, pens, sleeves, that kind of stuff. And I got it sitting over on my table over there, and I'm going to be working out a way to do a big giveaway for a bunch of that stuff to our loyal listeners. So thank you, Channel Fireball, for that. I know our listeners appreciate that kind of stuff. This one is going to be, I've got t-shirts. The LR t-shirts are back in stock at Channel Fireball, and I got a bunch of them at the house here so that I can put them in the LR gift packs again. Of course, we also give away all of the cards that we open on our Crack-A-Packs, and I've got a nice little package of cards here that we're going to be giving away, including, I see a Kiora in there. That's pretty sweet. There's some other stuff too. And I've got our winner for that, and our winner is Steve Bonneman. So, Steve, thank you so much for your support. You are awesome, and I'm going to be sending you this LR gift pack. I do, though, need you to email me, lr@lrcast.com, to let me know what size of t-shirt you would like. That is, of course, the Limited Resources shirt, and you'll get some LR sleeves and the cards as well. Okay. Also, of course, part of the Patreon is you get to ask questions, right? You get to submit questions on the thread in the Patreon that is only accessible by patrons, and we will pick a question every week. And this one comes from Nicholas, who says, "Hey guys, I was wondering what's your take on the current release schedule of Magic expansions, especially now that WotC has moved to a 2 per year, 2 set blocks." And he says, "Seems to me that we're drafting the fall expansion way longer than any other 3, and that doesn't take into account special sets like Modern Masters or Conspiracy." Luis, what are your thoughts on that? There's been a lot spoken about the new block structure from Wizards in regards to Constructed, and we've touched on it here on the show, but maybe give us your big picture view on how you think it's going to go for Limited.
I'm a big fan of the two set blocks because, look, and part of this, I think this is exactly what WotC did, is if you look back over the last 10 years or whatever, and you look at which sets were fun to draft. A lot of the sets that I'll name are triple of one set or double of one set plus one of the other. So, for example, triple Mirrodin, I liked a lot. Mirrodin Darksteel, I liked a lot. Mirrodin Darksteel 5th Bond was weaker than those two. And that's a pattern that repeated itself enough that it's like, well, it turns out it's, I think, easier and more effective to design a limited format where you're drafting 3 of the same set, then 2 of the same set plus one of a set. Even though in this case it's 3 Battle for Zendikar versus 2 of the Gatewatch plus 1 Battle for Zendikar, so it's a little slightly switched. But either way, it's more cohesive to draft multiple packs of the same set in terms of making sure the set's themes work out and making sure that the draft format, feels engaging and gets there. I'm not saying you can't get there on 3 different sets together, but it has historically worked out a lot better elsewise. So I'm looking forward to it. I actually don't know why we would draft the fall expansion way longer than the other 3. I don't think that's what we're doing going forward.
I don't think so either, but it does feel like that, right? Like thinking about it from just Battle for Zendikar terms, right? It came out in late September, I think. And now it's going to be, mid-January or whatever, which is, normally you'd think it'd be on a 3-month schedule, but September, October, November, December, it's like there's an extra, month and a half in there for some reason.
Right, but like after Oath of the Gatewatch, then Shadows of Innistrad comes out, and then we have the same amount of time between Shadows and the first expansion of Shadows as we did between Battle for Zendikar and Oath. I believe that's how it works, unless I'm misunderstanding something. So,
no, that is how I understand it too.
So we could be getting this wrong. Obviously, we're not looking at like a fact sheet right now. Right. But the way it's been explained to me, I think that this transition maybe made it feel that way because this is when we're first transitioning to that. But in general, we're going to have big set, small set, big set, small set a lot of the time.
Yeah. So. And I think it's great too. The third set's always got kind of the bad rap because they didn't really have a chance to impact the format in a huge way. They were only 1 pack. And they didn't get open that much, so you just didn't see the cards from it. And that did allow Wizards to do some kind of crazy stuff with those third sets, that knowing that even if it was kind of insane for limited, it was only 1 pack and not a big deal. I thought that switching the order that you open the packs certainly helped change that a little bit, but this seems to be a cleaner solution. Like you said, there haven't been that many full 3 blocks. I mean, I think I remember liking drafting Shards of Alara block, which was, a full 3. But I also distinctly remember, because that was one of the first sets that I really drafted. I remember thinking that I had figured out what the good stuff was in the last set, which was called Alara Reborn. And it had gold cards. And so you could set up for that. And I remember being at my local shop and looking at my opponents and being like, the people that don't know that are really at a disadvantage here. Like, and while I'm all for getting an advantage wherever it's there, I don't know if that's really the kind that you want to intrinsically put into your limited sets, where it's just like, oh, the people that just happen to know more cards have a big edge on the people that don't. Obviously, knowing the cards is important and all that. All right. So we've got probably our last BFC Crack-A-Pack here, Luis. We might end up doing one next week, but there's a decent chance that we don't. And so this one comes from, some guy named Jeremiah. I don't know who that is, but here we go. Let's get in there. All right, first up, Giant Mantis. Yeah,
4 mana for a 2/4 reach is, classically good, but as many viewers are no doubt aware, green is, regardless of how you think about it, the worst color in this set, and I'm not going to first pick a Giant Mantis anyway.
No, sad. Poor Giant Mantis. I have brought it in out of the sideboard when I've been unlucky enough to be in green, but... Brilliant Spectrum, that's the 4 mana sorcery with Converge, lets you draw X cards and discard 2 cards in X's number of colors of mana you spend on it.
I don't mind having one of these in some of my multicolored decks, but yeah, this is a card that routinely goes with 3 cards left in the pack, so I think we're going to keep that tradition alive.
Yeah, Ultra's Reap, 1 and a black instant, additional cost to cast it, sack a creature, you draw 2 cards. Card's a fun one to try to get into on the evaluation tip, because, I think people misevaluate this one a fair bit. Assuming that the card that you sacrifice is worth any fraction of a card, even just like a Scion or something like that, this still doesn't quite get you up cards. You're still even money on it, as we say. You're spending the Ultra's Reap plus the creature to get 2 cards off the top of your library. So it really kind of makes you do some work, namely the dream or whatever is when they point a removal spell at your creature and you Ultras Reap in response. But even then, you're only getting up a card. It's not like a huge blowout or anything like that. And I think that people tend to think that the ceiling's a little higher than it actually is on a card like this, where they think like, because it kind of feels like a blowout when you do that, but it's actually not. It's still just not that amazing, which is why you don't see it get played too much.
Agreed.
Royal Mage's Trick.
Another Converge card. This gives your opponent's creatures
cousin.
-X, -0 to turn, and then you draw a card with it. Another card I've sided in to good effect, but not a card I'm going to first pick.
Right. Sure Strike, reasonable combat trick, 1 in a red instant. Creature gets +3/+0 on first strike. Tell him to turn.
A lot of my red decks don't even want this effect, which makes me very hesitant to take it early.
Yeah, I never take. I think I've cast that card once or something. Felidar Cub. Oh, you poor Felidar Cub. And it's funny, just like the level of power that we have in Limited these days, because like cards like Felidar Cub are generally quite good, but in a set like this, they're just so meh. You know, you can see them make the cut occasionally, but you know, you can sacrifice
1 and a white for a 2/2 that sacks Destroy an Enchantment. 2-mana 2/2s that have upside are generally, you know, pretty good, but Felidar Cub it's the kind of card you'll play and be kind of mildly unhappy with, or then you'll sideboard in. So
more on that later. Sheer Drop. There's a card. 2 and a white, sorcery, destroy target tap creature, awaken for 6 mana, and it's an awaken 3.
I like Sheer Drop. I like it a little less than I thought I would coming in. Certainly the strongest card we've seen so far.
Yeah, I still like it quite a bit. Here's one. Kozilek's Channeler. I know you love this one.
We'll be talking about this one later. I would switch my pick now to Kozilek's Channeler. One of the reasons I really like Kozilek's Channeler is almost every deck in the format can use the extra mana, so ramping from 5 to 7 or 8 is very reasonable. And it's just so safe. It's a colorless card that is just going to go in your deck and it's going to be fine.
Do you think it's underrated?
I think it's a little underrated. I think it's not a card I'm happy to first pick, by the way. If I had to first pick this card, I wouldn't be like thrilled. But it is a card that every deck wants just about, and I see it 6th pick enough that I believe it's slightly underrated. It's more like a 3rd to 4th pick card.
Next is McKindy Slide Runner, the 2-mana 2/1 with trample and landfall. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn.
I'm just so off drafting these like aggressive landfall decks.
Same.
So I would not even consider this card.
I'm the same. Here's a nice payoff if you happen to be in these colors or can splash for it. It's Resolute Blademaster. So that's the 3 white red 2/2 with Rally. All your creatures get double strike until end of turn.
Blademaster's fine. I never win with red-white, and I don't really like the ally decks. One of the disappointments for me is that the ally deck, multicolored ally decks, didn't really get there. So I'm taking Kozilek's Channel over Resolute Blademaster. I could see taking either one. Resolute Blademaster is powerful enough to first pick.
Yeah, I would take Channeler all day over it. Here's another card that's been really interesting. It's Turn Against.
Yeah, the 4 and a red devoid instant where you take one of your opponent's creatures and untap it and it gains haste. Card everyone knew going in was going to be at least good, and then everyone started to think it was terrible, and now I'm somewhere in the middle. I would take Channeler over it, but Turn Against is fine in a base red deck. It's nothing more than that, though.
Yeah. I mean, if you're playing against people that don't know it exists, then it's great. The problem is everybody knows it exists. Sylvan Scrying as an uncommon. 1 and a green sorcery. Search your library for a land, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. No.
I've played it, but you don't really want to play it.
What do you think about it when you play it? Like, it's not card disadvantage, right?
No, but it's not really worth the 2 mana you spend. I played it mostly in like 3-color decks where it ends up being a pseudo fixer. Because the thing is, fixers where you have to be base green that don't accelerate you are also not that impressive. So, and maybe if you have a land that does something like a spawning bed, it gets a little better. But the card is highly mediocre. So
it's highly, but the thing is that it's not like it's just a tempo loss, right?
Yeah. You're not down cards.
You're not down cards or anything. You just have to spend the 2 mana, which
but I think just a land is the problem.
It just turns into something that you don't really care about that much in a land. Yeah.
It's as bad as drawing a land late game, unless you're getting, again, like a special land. And sometimes you just can't afford to play it turn 2 because you have a 2-drop and a 3-drop.
Ooh, we've got 2 rares. We've got a foil rare and a regular rare.
All right.
Which one do you want first?
Foil.
Foil rare is Akum Hellkite.
All right, I like Akum Hellkite, 4 red for a 4/4 flyer. When you play a land, it does 1 damage. When you play a mountain, it does 2 damage. So
yeah, it's good enough, right? Know, this isn't the kind of card that completely crushes, but I have definitely got respect for Akum Hellkite, and it's not the kind of card I would pass for a Kozilek's Channeler here.
No, certainly not.
Our other rare is Gouldraz Overseer.
This is like they're like the mirror versions because this is the 4 black for a 3/4 flyer. landfall, all your creatures get +1/+0, but if it was a swamp, +2/+0, or all your other creatures, it doesn't pump itself. Yeah, this card's highly mediocre. I've played it and been very unhappy. So I'm taking Akum Hellkite, and then second pick, I'm likely taking Channeler. Even if I first picked a white card and I saw this pack with the Hellkite missing, I think I would take Channeler. Though I might take, if my first pick was like a Lantern Scout, I would just take the Resolute Blade Master.
What about Sheer Drop?
I don't think Sheer Drop is as good as Blade Master or Channeler. If you're in the market, I would just take the Blade Master if you want to take a white card. But first pick, Hellkite, pretty easy.
Yeah, I'm taking Hellkite too. I think that card holds its own. All right, let's get into this Sunset show for Battle for Zendikar. We got a lot of fun stuff to cover here as we look back at what has been kind of an up and down, kind of crazy set. Certainly not, comparable to the sets that we had before it, which were, like Origins, which played out in a very kind of specific way, but it didn't have any, super swingy nature to it as far as like our discovery process. We were like, oh, we can beat down. And it was like, oh yeah, okay. And then that was kind of it, and you go back to Dragons of Tarkir, and that one sort of settled in after we got there, and it kind of like the tracks that we had seen ahead of us a little bit were the ones we ended up walking down. But this set was not like that. This set definitely took us down some weird paths and stuff. So the first thing I want to do, Luis, I want you to summarize the set in one sentence, if you could. What would that sentence be?
Don't draft green. If I only got one sentence to tell someone something that would not only summarize the set but help them win Battle for Zendikar drafts, it would be don't draft green.
Yeah, no, that is from a strategic perspective, I think that is probably the cleanest descriptor of the set. My one sentence to describe it was a bit hectic, but ultimately fun. This set kind of was weird, right? And we're going to go over some of the weirdness as we go, but discovering this set and figuring out what parts worked, what parts didn't, was a real journey. It was not obvious. This was one of the most challenging ones for like a show like ours, because we like to keep it real with the listeners, where if we don't know what the set does yet, we're not going to come on here and just make stuff up, right? We're going to draft the set. We're going to get some information so that you can have something useful to use. And with a set like this, before it comes out, it is just really tough to break down exactly how these things are all going to play out. Because when we first got our hands on the set, we definitely said, okay, well, there's a bunch of colorless things going on, so that might matter. And we definitely said, well, there's a lot of allies here. That might be a thing. And then we said, oh, there's landfall, so that could be a thing, right? We kind of followed the big signs on top of the set.
There were obviously a bunch of themes going on, and so we had to take into account those themes, but the depth or which themes got there and which didn't is not something that we're going to easily be able to predict, because like you said, we don't want to come here and say we're high confidence on things when we're not, so we're just not going to do that. We're going, when we feel strongly about something, we're going to tell you. But when we think like for example, when we're going to talk about some underrated cards, some of the cards that we underrated weren't cards that we missed completely on. We weren't like, well, this card's trash and ended up being great. It's more like, we don't know how good this card's going to be. We're going to give it a rating based on that, and we're going to let you know when our confidence level gets higher.
Yeah, exactly. And this one definitely had some curveballs about which of these mechanics and archetypes got there and which of them didn't, and then which of them that we couldn't really see, that ended up getting there. So let's talk about that for a minute, Luis. What turned out to be the best archetypes in the set?
Before I answer that, one quick note is that one of our, New Year's resolutions is to do more sunset shows, to make sure we just do a sunset show for every set, because we have been a little bit lax on that. So this is the start of that. Anyway.
Yes. No, good point. Yep. I
just want to mention that. The best archetypes, I think hands down, just the Devoid archetypes, which are a group. You've got, in the order I like, is blue-red being the best, followed by blue-black, followed by black-red. That I think, if you were to summarize like one group, because they all kind of intertwine, that is where you want to be. That is the decks that end up being the best. And then Blue-White Flyers is the other deck that I really like, and it sits outside of those decks.
Yeah, so for me, the breakdown is a little bit different, but along the same lines. I also like the Devoid decks the best, but my ranking would go blue-red, blue-white, which is not Devoid, and then blue-black, You notice a theme here, blue, blue, blue are the ones I like. I don't like black, red. I never could make that deck work where I was really happy with it. And I would actually sub in the black, white deck, the life gain deck, as long as you knew how to draft it and the pieces were open, which unfortunately wasn't really reliable. But if you could give me a good version of that deck, I would take it over, say, a black, red Devoid deck all day long.
Despite trying to disagree with you more, if I were ranking the blue, white deck like with the Devoid decks, I agree with you. I think blue, red followed by blue, white is kind of where I put those in. I do like black, red the least. I do have to disagree a little bit on the black, white deck. What you're saying is true. It's a good deck if it gets there and doesn't always get there. But in my experience, and I drafted a lot of this set, it almost never gets there. So I don't know if it's that other people love that deck and are just slamming it, because I played against that deck a lot more than I played with it, and honestly, I wasn't that impressed with it. Like, yeah, the deck that has Serene Steward, Bloodbond Vampire, 3 Colostri Healers, Retreat to Hagra, and all the cards that go in the deck is good. I just saw it happen so infrequently. I feel like when there's 4 Colostri Healers opened, frequently 2 different people have 2.
Yeah. That is funny, because thinking about my progression with the deck is that I didn't think it was good earlier. I didn't see it. And then, we went to the Pro Tour and did some more drafts, and it started to become more of a thing. I remember doing a deck tech with Matt Sperling, where he was really high on the deck, and that kind of brought it to the forefront, I think, of a lot of people's minds. And I remember drafting the deck around that time and thinking, this deck's sweet. But you know what? That was still very early by normal Magic player standards, right? You're still within 2 weeks of the set having been released. And I don't draft that deck anymore.
No, the question I want to ask you is, how many times did you actually end up in black-white? And not just that's talk about it in theory.
No, that's a great question. I mean, I certainly did. Like, I forced it. I did it in some side drafts at GP Seattle on the Friday. I did, 2 or 3 drafts, and I drafted 2 of those were back to back. They were very good. But that's not that many. Yeah, the sample size is actually quite low. It's really interesting. And again, you could probably look at my last 15 drafts and I didn't touch that archetype.
Yeah,
Which is kind of telling, I think. Like, maybe I have it in my head as a little more prominent than I think. I mean, I did try to qualify it by saying if you get it, but maybe that is too big of a qualifier to have it on any list. Like, if the truth is, I mean, because I could obviously build you a good deck of almost any 2 colors if I could just put together all the great pieces, right? But this one I think has a high power ceiling on it. But if you never get it, who cares, right? Like, it's not really relevant. It's super interesting.
Yeah, that's why I didn't put it on the list. I always had it in my head as like, yeah, this is just one of the decks or whatever. And it turns out, I think that it kind of isn't, at least effectively. When I look at what I ended up actually getting to draft, it just wasn't there.
That's super interesting. But, the thing I think that we can take away for sure from both of our lists is blue, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, blue is the linchpin for all the decks that we really like here. 3
of the 4 best decks, I believe, are blue. And that's one of the reasons that blue is so good, is that you can take a lot of its cards are good in any of the deck, like, Clutch of Currents and Benthic Infiltrator. Even though Benthic Infiltrator looks like a Devoid card, I play that card every time in blue-white. I don't think I've ever had a Benthic Infiltrator and left it on my sideboard.
Same.
So what's the risk of taking it? The answer is just there isn't one. So that's why part of the reason the blue is so good.
Yeah.
Moving on to the worst archetypes, what's the worst archetype that you actually drafted?
So early on,
by the way, archetypes and exclamation points here.
yeah, and in this case, it absolutely belongs there. So early on, I like to explore around, right? I like to look at the different things, and so when you looked at the set from a perspective of a new player to the set, one of the big clues that we look for are directly from R&D with the new mechanics, right? And so you look at it and you say, okay, well, there might be a landfall deck. Well, what would that look like? Probably green-red, because that's the most landfall. All right, green-red landfall. That could be a thing I want to try. And maybe you even find this black-white life gain deck. You look at these Devoid strategies and say, well, there's a few different color pairs I can piece together. I'll probably try that out. Oh, allies. Well, which colors is this? Maybe it's Naya. Maybe it's 2 of the, Naya colors. I'll probably try that out. And then you look at Converge. And you're like, well, I want to try out the Converge deck, right? And so that's what I did. And the problem is that anytime you're going to do Converge, you're almost always going to be starting off base green, because green has the ability to fix your mana and to produce different colors with Lifespring Druid and Natural Connection and a few other things. And So I thought, well, this is sweet, and I'll take the converge cards, and I'm going to be, converging for 4 or 5, and I'm going to try to make this work and see what happens. The big draws to that are like Skyrider Elf. You're like, whoa, this card's sweet, and it sure enough, it is. That card's very good. The problem is that the other converge cards did not live up to their end of the bargain. And, when you look at some of the converge cards, even that we got in our Crack-a-Pack, right? Like the 2 blue ones that we looked at a few minutes ago, Royal Mage's Trick and Brilliant Spectrum, right? Like these are potential slots for payoffs for being in a converge deck. These are supposed to be the things that you say, okay, look, R&D, I'm going to put in the work, right? I'm going to take these cards. And I didn't know at the time that green was as low on power level compared to the other colors as it was. So I'm like, okay, I'm taking these cards. I'm playing my Lightspreen Druids. I'm playing these ramp spells. And I need a big payoff. Right? Like you have to reward me for going through all these hoops. And then when you play Brilliant Spectrum, you're like, well, okay, I guess that was kind of a thing.
Well, I think it was a two-sided problem. One side is that the converge cards, like you're saying, aren't good enough. The other side is the mana fixing just wasn't there.
Yeah, the mana fixing also was really tough to get. Now, if you're willing to go into green, you did get a reprieve from that, where you weren't just leaning on like an Evolving Wilds or whatever. But even then, it still wasn't premium mana fixing. It all cost 3 mana. And there were certainly decks that could punish you for that. So yeah, that was probably the worst deck that I drafted because I kind of wholeheartedly went into the Converge deck and just realized that there wasn't one. The payoffs weren't there and the setup was tough. So it's like you're asking me to do a lot and then you're not giving me the reward for it. And that's pretty much the worst case scenario, right? I mean, when you're jumping through a ton of hoops that don't really affect the board, hoping for a later payoff, and then there's no payoff. So that was probably, that was the worst archetype I drafted. I'm sure I drafted worse decks than that, in my time in the format, but that was the one that really stuck out of like, well, this failed, right? Like, where's my big payoff? And, it turns out Prism Array isn't really what I was looking for.
The funny thing is the first time I drafted, I also drafted like a kind of like a Bant, Converge deck, and it did not work out well. The deck I consistently drafted, which wasn't a real archetype, which I actually liked, was Esper Eldrazi.
So what deck is that?
Basically, Esper Eldrazi is when you go for either blue-white or Eldrazi, like blue-black Eldrazi, and you don't get there, and you just end up as a mix of both.
Plan B.
I was relatively impressed by it. It was not a deck I wanted to go into, but when it got there, it was pretty funny. So I thought that deck was it was messy, but it did win some games.
Yeah, I had one like that as an honorable mention, which was, ultimately when I saw Eldrazi, my mentality is I want to cast those. I want to make big stuff. This could be fun. It reminds me of Rise and it makes me want to do that stuff. So I did draft, and this was after I knew that green wasn't good, quite a few, Call the Scions, Eyeless Watcher, and then trying to play a Breaker of Armies or something, and just trying to do that. You can only have your Breakers of Armies, Clutch of Currents back to back so many times before you finally give up on the strategy. But I will say those were the most fun decks. Those are the ones that I look forward to the most during the draft portion. Like when I was drafting, then I'm like, oh my God, I just need another big Eldrazi, or maybe I'll open Ulamog or whatever and try to make something big. But the strategy really didn't line up well with what we had in the format, unfortunately.
Agreed.
All right. Next, we've got, what was a funky rare that you always hope to see? That you always, a card that maybe you always wanted to build around, Luis. This is like, this is obviously everybody wants to open up, one of the best cards in the set and just kick butt with it. But, there's always something a little offbeat, a little different that you liked, right? That you were like, ooh, we got one of these. Let's do this. And it kind of sends you down a weird path. What was that one for you?
The one I like the most in this category is Smothering Abomination, the 4/3 flyer for 4.
Yeah.
That when you sacrifice a creature, draw a card, and every upkeep you have to sacrifice a creature. Because it was one of the cards that actually made the black-green sacrifice deck tick, whereas that deck wasn't really a deck otherwise, I don't believe. So I did enjoy drafting it. The card was powerful. I'm not saying the card was weak, but it led you down an interesting path. Wasn't good in every single deck, and if you did the work, it was good. My honorable mention, of course, is part of the Water Veil, the take an extra turn, Awaken 6. The card was decent.
It's very powerful.
I believe it was playable if you're a big mana deck, which, like you said, don't always get there. But part of the Water Veil is fun. It was a little less themed. You just need to cast it.
Yeah, that was sweet. My funky rare was From Beyond. And again, it suffered from being green, which, ultimately made it a much worse card than it actually is. But man, I played this in the pre-release and I had it in a few of the early drafts. And I gotta say, this card was great. I mean, it introduced this really cool aspect to it where you've got this win condition that just sits on the battlefield in the sense that it just makes all these scions, and those can just be a win condition for you. But if things start to go a little sideways, you may need to sacrifice it to go get some big Eldrazi. And I love that interplay between, do I sacrifice it now? Do I wait? Do I do it on my turn? Is it really too late for me to just lean on From Beyond? I also love the fact that it just turned the game into this situation where instead of having to, decipher every little thing, you're just like, I need to make this game go longer. And then I'm just generating this advantage. Think of like a low-level planeswalker, right? It's not doing anything amazing, but it's just like spitting out these creatures one at a time, and it's going to keep doing it. And man, that advantage really does stack up. And that was a card I looked forward to seeing early. And unfortunately, I didn't really get to play with much late just because I would start to pass it at some point, because the green factor just really kind of killed it for me. And the fixing in the set wasn't really such that you could splash for it very often.
Yep.
Sad. I really like that card too. All right, let's talk about some of the cards, Luis, that we were wrong about during the set reviews. Maybe another way to put it is what cards really surprised us one way or another. I did go back and
shortest segment of the show.
Well, I mean, honestly, look, I'm going to be straightforward with you. I did go back and listen to a lot of the review when I was pulling those clips out for a few episodes back. And I got to say, I was pretty proud of us there. I think that we were measured, in our thoughts on it. I don't think that we missed any of the cards by like a massive amount where we were just like, this card is terrible. You're never going to play this. And then boom, it's awesome or it's sweet. Like we were definitely off by a letter grade here or there, which is a big jump. But, I think that like when you heard us talk about it, we would say things like, well, look, if blah, blah, blah deck ends up being really good, then this card's going to be special and one that you really want. But as it sits, we're going to give it like a C, right? And then it ended up being that deck was really good. And so you bumped it up. And, I think that's pretty cool, but still that doesn't mean that we were right about all the cards. And I think that, there was also some big picture stuff. So what was the stuff we were most wrong about coming out of the set review?
The thing that was the least readily apparent and the most important was, again, that green was not playable.
Yeah.
I don't think it's our fault that we didn't factor it in because you can't go into a set assuming one of the colors isn't playable. But green was really, really bad. And I don't want to debate here about whether you should never draft green or how bad it was exactly, because even the people who think that drafting green is right sometimes, I'm not one of them, by the way, I think you shouldn't draft it, can't defend it as being anything better than the worst of all the colors by a lot. Mm-hmm. Like, even the people who think you should sometimes draft green think, yeah, it's the worst color, but sometimes it's worth drafting. And that's fine. Let's just leave it at either the worst color or undraftable, but regardless, very bad. And it turns out, yeah, just all the green cards are some amount worse than, basically any cards of other colors. Like, even cards of comparable power level, you should just give them a downgrade for being green. And we didn't realize that coming in, and that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And that was a big one. One of the cards specifically within that, under that umbrella that stuck out to me, and it's one I'll talk about a little later as well, is unnatural aggression.
This is part of the reason green is so bad, actually.
Yeah, which is really interesting, right? It's not, because some of the cards we've talked about are actually very good cards, but because they're green, they take a hit because that means you have to surround them with bad cards, right? Like, we just talked about From Beyond. That's a really good Magic card. Like, that's a card that can generate long-term advantage. It has this cool search ability, and it's a little slow, but it's really powerful if you build around it. But it's green, and you just don't want to put it around a bunch of green cards. If it were red or some other color, that would be a very respectable rare. The thing about unnatural aggression that's super interesting is that that's not the case with it. It's not bad because it happens to be green. It's just bad, which is really weird because and again, I'm going to touch on this later, but we kind of have this heuristic where we're like, hey, fight cards. Well, basically every fight card they've given us since they came out in Innistrad or whatever have been good. Like, they've ranged from quite good, very, very good, to like playable good. And this one is the first one that we've seen that isn't. And I missed that. I kind of shortcut it, I think, a little bit. And I said, well, this is just a different flavor on these good cards that we've seen for a long time. And it will be somewhere in the good range, maybe a little worse, maybe a little better. But as it turns out, if you don't pump the power or toughness of the creature, that's a big hit. And then also making it 3 mana, can be a hit too. Instant speed was the payoff for that. And as it turns out, that wasn't enough to bring it up into the really good count.
Was the power and toughness of all the green creatures were also not as big as they needed to be.
So that is true. That actually does. It wasn't necessarily their greenness that did that, but that is true. It happened to not match up super well in this set either. But that was one that, I definitely thought was going to be a very solid card in the format, and ended up being a card that you just passed. Even when you were in green, there was cards you were going to take over it pretty readily. So that was when I was pretty far off on you.
And where green fell short, Devoid overperformed.
Yes.
And again, if you look back at our ratings, it's not like we were like, oh, Mist Intruder, this is a 1-2 for 2. This is garbage. We're like, hey, Mist Intruder, this card could be great if processing is such a big thing and Devoid is a big thing, but we're not sure where that's going to fall yet. It turns out it falls on the high end of the spectrum.
Yep.
So
yeah, that was it. That's what it did. Also, we realized that quite quickly, I remember. Looking back, I remember thinking, you can get 20, like I remember the show where we realized you can get 19 or 20 colorless cards in a deck. And coming into it, it was hard for me to piece together that would be the case. I still assumed that the colorless cards would be the minority of the cards in your deck, of the spells in your deck. And it turns out that wasn't the case. You could make it the vast majority if you really wanted.
Right, and all like green cards get a downgrade, all the Devoid cards kind of get an uptick where, like Vestige of Emrakul, 4 mana, 3/4 trample, not an impressive card, but it gets a slight bump because of the fact that it's a Devoid card and it fits well into the Devoid strategy. Some of the minor notes are like, sheer drops a little bit worse than it looks. It's still certainly a playable fine card, but it's not really a card you want a high pick for, But most of that's just minor adjustments. I think structurally, green is just worse than it looked like, and Devoid is better than it looked like. And if I could go back and re-review with those things in mind, I think we'd be more accurate. Yeah,
for sure. Let's talk underrated cards, Luis. What were some of the underrated cards for you as we came out of the initial preview season and then into the set review? And now we've kind of had the set for a while. What were some of the cards that were underrated? Maybe they did end up finding their day in the sun, but they were underrated at some point.
I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because there's actually a fair amount of them. But Sludge Crawler is a big one.
That's a huge one.
I think the number one. Sludge Dragon, right? This is the 1 mana 1/1 Devoid Ingest that you can pay 2 mana to give it +1/+1. Turns out it's just great on turn 1 because it can enable all your processors, and even late game it attacks as a 4/4 or a 5/5. So it ended up being very, very good. And part of that was the Devoid strategies, and part of it was just the card is just better than it looks. Valakut Invoker is one of my pet cards where I always want 1 or 2 Valakut Invokers because I also really like having Kozilek's Channeler in my deck. And having a 3 mana 2 that you can pay 8 to cast a deal 3 essentially. This is a card I think protects you from Flood well enough that I was very happy playing it. Another one.
I like the Invoker too, by the way.
Yeah, Invoker is quite good. Another one is a Wavewing Elemental, the 6 mana 3/4 that has landfall +2/+2 and has flying. 5 power flyers that come in there are good, I guess.
I guess so. I don't know. I've still never really come around on this being good. I've put it in some of my flyer decks when I needed something that costs a little bit more mana. But are you happy playing this card? Is that where you're at with it?
Yeah.
Like you just
it's not like I slam it in my blue-black Devoid decks, but in blue-white flyers, I like having 1 or even 2 of these cards.
God, I never got there for that. I don't know why.
I just think it's a good finisher.
It is that. It is definitely that. When you sell it as a 5 power flyer common, it does sound pretty good.
Yeah, Spell Shrivel is another one I ended up liking a lot more than I thought I would. This is the 2 and a blue counter spell unless they pay 4 and then exile it. And it, again, like Sludge Crawler, it enables processors, which is a strong ability to have. And there's just a lot of 6+ mana cards that this card's good at countering that people have in their decks. Every deck just has 7 drops in it, or not every deck, but almost every deck. And that's just enough for me to want cards like Spell Shrivel. So I was pretty happy playing 1 of this card.
Yeah, this is one that it wasn't. We're kind of used to the whole mana leak style card or whatever being bad in the late game, but it turned out Spell Shrivel actually had some legs going into the late game in this format, which kind of changed it into a pretty decent spell overall.
A card which I think is underrated, but not a card I still play all that often, is Slabhammer. The 2-mana equipment's 2 to equip, and then when you attack, you can bounce land, one of your own lands, and get +2/+2. The card is very good, and a lot of the people I know like it. I ended up not drafting aggressive decks all that often, but if you are aggressive, this card does end the game.
I must be in the same camp as you, because I just think this card sucks. Like, I've never played the thing happily. I've always just thought, why am I doing this to myself? And I don't recall losing to it ever. So to me, this card has never gotten there, but I hear people whose opinions I respect immensely say that they think the card's good, and I'm willing to defer to them on it. I don't know if it's just the type of decks that I draft, or the type of, like, either the ones I draft myself, meaning that, like you said, like maybe I'm not drafting the most aggressive decks, or the type of decks that I like to draft do well against it. But whenever I see that card, it's more of a sigh of relief than anything else for me. I'm just like, oh, okay, good. They're playing stupid Slabhammer. I get to bounce that at some point and just set them back ages, and they're not developing their mana. And it's just like, it's one of those things where, you know, a fortified rampart can go a long way to holding back a slab-hammered creature or whatever. It's not that I think it's unplayable, but I don't like it. Again, I've never really found a home for it myself, and I've never really feared the card. So it's one of those weird ones where, again, I do tend to default, though, when, you know, Hall of Fame level, you know, drafters say that they think the card's good, then I will default to them on it. But I just haven't been able to figure it out myself.
Agreed. And you mentioned Fortified Rampart a second ago. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think that one's also one of them that was quite underrated. I mean, when we did the set review on it, we kind of were like, well, that's a lot of toughness. Like, it's not that that's nothing, but it's not an ally. It's not colorless. It doesn't trigger anything or do anything. And so, you know, we're just like, why is this here? And we found out not too long after, when people started drafting sort of your classic blue-white flyers, which, by the way, was just one of I think the happiest surprises in the deck for me, or in the set for me, just was like, by the way, here's just a normal deck, right? Like, you don't have to know anything specific about the set to draft this. You don't have to get critical mass of some, you know, like, oh, it says the word devoid on it, so draft a bunch of those. It's just a deck that has a clean function of, you know, gumming up the ground and getting through in the air. And Fortified Rampart ended up really pulling its weight in such a big way in that deck. I still am impressed by how good that card actually is in this set. I think it's also partially offset by the fact that there's not a whole lot of awesome stuff to do at 2 mana. Especially in that deck. I mean, that's where you'll see Anticipate quite a bit. And Fortified Rampart really does serve that role nicely of doing something in the early game and just, you know, making landfall creatures look bad and making, you know, 4-powered 4-drops or whatever just look terrible. And Fortified Rampart, you know, kind of makes people want to play combat tricks that they don't normally want to. And I really have appreciated that, about the card. And like I said, coming in, it looked like kind of a throwaway, but it ended up being a card I played pretty often in the set.
Yeah, Fortified Rampart, also Tightening Coils, kind of fits the same.
Oh yeah,
the same slot. These are both they both have sixes on them. They both are a 2-mana card that can deal with an opponent's threat pretty easily.
Yeah, Terminate's a good card, I'm told. All right, let's talk about some of the controversial cards. So these are the cards that throughout the course of the set, you know, raised the most arguments about whether it's good or terrible or the best thing ever. And there's quite a few here. What did you like for controversial cards, Luis?
The first one I put on the list is a Tajuru Warcaller, the 3/3/3 2/1 ally that whenever you play it or another ally, all your creatures get +2/+2. I think this is a kind of a proxy for basically first pickable green card, like Undergrowth Champion or Ornreef Hydra, what have you. And the controversy is it worth playing green even when you first pick one of these cards? I think I still ended up answering no on that.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing, you know, Owen Turtenwald first pick a Mist Intruder over an Undergrowth Champion, and that's kind of where he was at in the format. So I'm using Tajuru Warcaller as a proxy for green, but that's fine. And yes, I think it is controversial.
I think so too. Yeah, it raised that important question, and it was really the last holdout of the non-rares specifically, but even further. Yeah, it was the one that was like, okay, but what about me? Right? Look at what I say, because the card's very powerful. And even then, if you start passing it, you know that green's really tanked out. What's the next one? Oh, the next one.
Dampening Pulse is a card I've talked a lot about, so I'm not going to go through the whole spiel. But
did I hear you pull up your soapbox there? Or?
Yeah, maybe if there's a scraping noise there, or it was a squeaking noise, maybe it was my chair.
Look, man, we don't do a podcast to not get on our soapbox. That's what this is for.
I don't know if I've ever seen a literal soapbox in my life, by the way. This is kind of like a
I don't even know what it is.
Is this even a real thing? Multiple shoehorns.
I'm going to look it up.
So Dampening Pulse is the enchantment that give all your opponent's creatures -1/-0, and it just messed with combat math so well. And again, I'm not saying this card's the nuts. I'm just saying some people thought the card was unplayable and just never looked at it. It was so much better than that. There were some decks where when you play this card, they just cannot win. So
yes. Take that, Benthic Infiltrator. Also, it being an enchantment made it so difficult to get rid of. Yeah, I ended up coming up on this one as well. I gave it, a C+ or something, and now I said I'd give it a B. And I think the card's just super thumbs up. Love it. Good card. Would play.
I believe you gave it a C- because I went back and looked at the grades.
Was it C-? At any rate, I give it a B now. We talked about this, by the way, in that one episode, but I can't remember what I gave it. But yes, but you were definitely right about that one. Dampening Pulse is great. And by the way, the second Dampening Pulse, dear God, they can never do anything. It's so good. Definitely.
Another card which I thought was controversial was a Swarm Surge, the 2 and a black sorcery. It gives all your creatures +2/+0 and all your colorless creatures first strike. We thought this card was just utter garbage. And
yeah, mainly because it was a sorcery, right? That's what we were focused in on.
And so then the immediate response to that was like, actually, maybe this card is good. It does, in the All Devoid deck, it does a lot of damage. Your opponent can't block your creatures. So I adjusted upwards, and then after more playing with it, I'm like, actually, no, I still think this card is bad. Basically, whenever I put this in my deck thinking it would be good, I would just sideboard it out. Because, yes, there were some matchups where it was good, but in general, I do not believe the card was very good. So it's controversial because some people do swear by it, but if you ask my end of the format grade, it's closer to the D that we originally gave it or F that we originally gave it than it is to a C.
Yeah, I went on the same curve. I played it for a while and then eventually was like, can do a little better. One of the cards that I still hear people talk about, and we've talked about on the show, is Adverse Conditions.
Oh, yeah.
Tapping down a couple of creatures and making a Scion. So I think that there's some interesting interplay here because the first step is, do you play this in a control deck? And you and I are both on the no, you don't plan. But I do know people that do. And I think that that's wrong. I think that it doesn't quite hold up its end of the bargain in a control deck. But this is where you and I differ. I think that in a tempo deck or in a blue-white flyers deck, I do think it actually holds up its end of the bargain. Where you're a little more on the not so hot on it side. And this is one that I've definitely heard.
This is a card when my opponent casts it. I'm happy.
You feel good.
It's probably not good to put cards in your deck that your opponent wants you to cast.
That is true. That is a judgment that I use on it. But the truth is that, yeah, it's funny because when my opponent casts it on me, I'm often unhappy. I'm just like, oh no, I don't get these two. It's effectively a removal spell for 2 turns on 2 creatures. And that's pretty powerful, right? That's a big tempo swing. So if you have the type of deck or the board state that can capitalize on that, it is a very big swing. The problem is, and I talk about this all the time with quadrant theory stuff, right? Is that when you find yourself in a situation where you're behind, this card does buy you a little bit of extra time, but at a very high cost. Costing you an entire card out of your hand is not worth that. We're talking about, kind of a fog type scenario here at that point where it's a reasonable default, a reasonable backup plan, but it's not good. That's not what you want to be doing with it. You want to be locking down their 2 big dumb creatures, hitting them in the air for 4 or 5, and then doing it again the next turn and basically putting it so that they can't finish off the game. But it does come at a big cost, right? A card is no small shake. So I can definitely see both sides of that argument. Another funny one that doesn't seem like it would be controversial, but Culling Drone is one that I see some people play all the time and other people just kind of refuse to play. And the reason why I think it's a funny one is just because it's such an inoffensive card, right? It's just like a 2/2 with a little bit of upside, which is kind of a limited staple. It's a card that you see all the time. That generally sees play and does well. But as time has gone on throughout the format, I've seen it get play less and less. And I know I've played it less and less. It just hasn't quite held up in the way that you'd think a 2/2 with upside would for whatever reason. And, but I've still seen people that just have refused to acknowledge that and just play as many of them as they get in every black deck they do. Cause they're just like, well, this type of card's good, right? It's a 2/2 for 2 with upside. Like that's just a sort of a limited staple. But going back to what you were talking about earlier with the underrated cards, right? What's his name? Sludge Crawler? Like that card's just way better than this one. Where before I wouldn't have necessarily thought that.
Yeah, now the last one you got on the list is Grip of Desolation, which is funny because I agree at the beginning of the format, people were not sure whether it was better than Rolling Thunder. I do think that got settled pretty quickly, though.
It wasn't quick. It did happen, though.
Well, it was quick for some people.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I still think it's a lot closer than people think. I think it's kind of like people think it's the clever thing to say that Grip is like just straight up better than Rolling Thunder. I think that Grip did end up being a little bit better than Rolling Thunder in the set, but I think that was somewhat based on color. I do think Rolling Thunder is amazing, but this was one of the big debates for sure, or in the earlier stages was, as Grip was going up people's list higher and higher, it started to approach Rolling Thunder, which was sort of the de facto best uncommon coming into the format. And it does. I mean, it does kick butt. Like that card is nasty. And, but then people started saying, is it just better than Rolling Thunder? And then, yeah, it ended up surpassing it, I think, in most people's view.
I guess it is still controversial then because I don't think they're very close.
Okay. Well, I do. So, I think they're very close.
So there we go.
Yeah. Controversy still there. This is a fun one. What were some of the notable first picks that could really set the course for your draft? You get it and you're like, all right, we're in. This is what we're doing now. What were some of the stuff that jumped out to you?
Conduit of Ruin is the 6-mana 5/5 that lets you tutor for a 7+ mana card or a creature, put it on top of your deck, and then the first creature you play return costs 2 less. I like this card a lot. Obviously, it was a great card, so I'm not saying that this card was like undervalued or anything, but the reason I liked it is because this gave you an excuse to go really big. When you had a Conduit of Ruin, you knew you could just get there, and Conduit of Ruin made Ulamog, for example, a very playable card. So I like Conduit of Ruin. I thought it led to really awesome stuff. Another one for me is Halimar Tidecaller, the 2/3 that draws you an Awakened card from your graveyard.
So good.
And your lands have flying, your land creatures. But
yeah,
Halimar Tidecaller. First of all, I never passed it. I don't think. Mm-hmm. Maybe I passed it once in the whole format. Second of all, it was fun to draft around. It didn't take that much help. Just needed a couple of Awakened cards, and it was just really cool. It just this I never felt better than after taking a Halimar Tidecaller early.
Yeah, no, that card was super, super good and really fun too. And highly, highly powerful. One of mine are a little different than yours. They're maybe more admitting things than not, but, Grip of Desolation. Wow. So the funny part is just that card was so good that when I first picked a Grip, this was one of those cards that made me just not want to get off my color. Normally, like I talked about it in last week's show.
It was the best uncommon, not close.
Yeah, and it's so like it did something so good to the board too that just like it felt so good, man, when you got 2 creatures at instant speed with that stupid card. It was like addicting, where if you give me a first pick, let's say a Balmy Dragon or something like that, a powerful, not like a Dragon Lord, just high level card, but some big flyer that costs 6 mana and is huge and has some ability or whatever. Like those cards are really, really good, maybe even better than Grip in a lot of scenarios. Yet for whatever reason, my stay open, style in draft still sticks, but Grip would just like reel me in where I'm just like, gotta play this Grip. So that for whatever reason set the course for me to play black more than most any other card. The other one was, it's just funny because you said Conduit of Ruin, kind of lets Ulamog be something that was in play. Mine is Ulamog. Because every time I was
setting you up, it was on purpose.
Yeah, no, every time I first picked it, I was like, we're doing it. And I just would refuse to basically draft any other deck than one that would give me the highest chance of casting my Ulamog. Look, the card paid you off, right? I mean, Ulamog was actually worth 10 mana, which is a tough sell and limited. But it actually is. And so I would just draft the most defensive, tokeny deck that I possibly could to try to cast Ulamog as often as possible. And that's, like I said, that's more me admitting, that maybe that wasn't in my win percentage's best interest every time, but I just didn't care. When I first picked Ulamog, we were doing it. We were on the Ulamog plan, and that was the end of that conversation. So yeah, I put Ulamog on my list for that. Oh, this next one's a time-honored limited resources tradition. What was the biggest groan test? And, we like to say what was the overrun of the set, and not meaning, what was the card that actually did overrun. It was the card that people play and you're like, really? Like, I was winning this game. You didn't even do anything. And now it's just over. And so this is the groan test. What was your biggest groan test?
What was the overrun in the set in that? What induced the biggest groans, even though it's really just you complaining unnecessarily?
Hey, it was necessary, or else we'd still have.
Look, all I'm saying is, before I knew Marshall at all, before I think we'd ever met, I'm like, who is this idiot, and why does he keep complaining about overrun? This is just not intelligent.
And then R&D listened and took it out of uncommon.
Yeah.
Marshall wins this round.
Yeah, you ended up. I'm not going to say being completely right, but the overrun did in fact move to rare, and I think that you, if not were part of it, you at least represented the reasons of why. So. Yes. My choice was Royal Spout, the 1 blue white, put a creature on top, but you can awaken it and make a 4/4 for 6 mana.
God, yes.
Because every time your opponent casts a Royal Spout, first of all, they get a 4/4. Second of all, they remove your creature. Third of all, you know what you're drawing next turn. And the worst is when they Royal Spouted one of your awakened lands.
Oh, I know.
And it was just like,
oh my God.
I feel like just an awakened Royal Spout was just game over always. So,
oh my God, awakening a land.
You couldn't even
I forgot about that. It's so good. What is that, an 8 for 1? I can't even do the math.
Yeah, it's just too high. But most of it is like, your opponent is just going to decide, like, they're going to cast their card and you're going to get to untap and maybe try to win the game. But instead, no, you're getting, you're just not even getting the top deck.
God, I love that. That was and of course, doing that to other people had the same effect in reverse, right? It was the fist pump test. You're like, yes. And, you just have to watch them draw that land off the top. Oh, that was a good one, Luis.
Yeah. Royal Spout, I think, definitely fits the bill.
One of them that popped up for me multiple times was Ugin's Insight. And I know it's a little bit of a weird choice because it doesn't just win the game on the spot, but that was part of the reason why it was such a groan test passer, is that I would often find myself in these kind of attrition battles, right? Where I'm like trading card for card. I'm maneuvering for board position by just a little bit, and the dust settles and I've tricked my opponent or maybe been a little more mana efficient. And I'm the one who has the Benthic Infiltrator that can still get in where the rest of the board's kind of dried up and we're both low on cards or whatever. And then my opponent goes, Ugin's Insight, Scry 5. And I'm just like, no. And I just know the game has now slipped away from me because I don't have a card with that level of raw power raw card advantage, especially after the Scry, where you're pretty sure they're drawing 3 spells. And that's just puts them so far ahead. So that one was one that tended to match up well against the type of stuff that I was doing and definitely drew a lot of groans from me. And the other one's a little more simple. It was Breaker of Armies. Yeah, I get it. They spent 8 mana. They should get something really powerful. So it's not really a complaint. But I will say that the times when they go Breaker of Armies and you say it resolves and you look at your hand and there's no answer, it's just like, well, that's game. Like there was just really so few ways to combat that type of card where, attacking with everything was rarely a great option. And the thing just, wiped your board a lot of the time. So Breaker of Armies was definitely one that was like, ugh. Like if you
Breaker of Armies was the real deal.
Yeah. Any other Eldrazi in that spot. But again, I feel a little bad about putting it on the list just cause I'm like, yeah, but they spent 8 mana. Like that's what you get, right? Like that's, maybe you should have done something about that a little earlier. So, what about this next category, Luis?
What was the most frustrating bad card to lose to?
Yeah.
This is a funny category. This is the card that, for me, it's what will you not miss playing against? My card isn't exactly on that level, but it just annoyed me. It's a salvage drone, the one with ingest, and when it dies, you can loot.
What are you doing here? Yeah.
Every time my opponent played it, it was atrocious, but I would still lose to it sometimes, and it just was just like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Like, why am I losing to this card? Why are you even playing this card?
Yeah. So. The one I had was, and this only happened once, thank God, was Volcanic Upheaval.
Ooh, the land destruction card?
Yeah, this was main deck, and I'm like, Coastal Discovery, and I'm like, grabbing a dice and reaching for my library, and they're like, wait, and I'm like, no,
yeah.
no, and then they're like, Volcanic Upheaval, no, how dare you mess with my discovery of Coast? You do not do that to me, and obviously that card's, god awful.
Yeah, it's not good. I got to do the same thing with Scour from Existence once, the 7 mana exile any permanent.
Ugh.
My opponent at GP Atlanta played Ondu Rising, and I like check. I'm like, this works, right? Yeah, this works. And I scoured the land, and it was great.
That is bad. And was that like
Ondu falling?
I'm curious. Did they do it pre-blocks or post-blocks?
Well, they did it pre-combat because it's a sorcery.
Oh, Ondu Rising. I'm sorry. I thought I thought it was encircling Fisher. My bad. All right. Ondu Rising. Gotcha. Ooh, that's nice. So you effectively got a 4/4. You killed a 4/4. Yeah. Huh. That's really good.
Which was good.
Yeah. No, I'm proud of you. I like that. All right. Here's a big one. What was the bombiest bomb? The card that you wanted to open, pack one, pick one, or in your sealed pool. What was the number one best card in the set?
My number 1 and 2 both involve planes. My number 1 is just Gideon, ally of Zendikar. It's a 4-mana planeswalker that, first of all, in turn 4 is just absurd. Second of all, even if your opponent has flyers out, which is kind of like the traditional way to beat planeswalkers, you could just turn them into an emblem that gave all your creatures ++1 forever. And just overall, it was really hard to deal with, really, really strong, and was just good early, good late. Gideon, I think, was just like the nuts. Quarantine Field is a honorable mention, because this is the card that maybe not quite as effective at 4 mana, but this is the kind of card that, especially in sealed, might even be better than Gideon. Probably not, because again, Gideon just playing it on turn 4 and winning a game you have no business winning is awesome. But casting a Quarantine Field to kill their best 2 permanents is just absurd.
All right, I went a little bit of a different direction here.
You decided not to answer the actual question.
I will concede that you are correct, but I figured it'd be a little boring if we both said the same thing. So, to the answer, what is the bombiest bomb? I took Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, because sure, whatever, he's too expensive to be the best card in the set realistically, but when you cast him, he is the best card in the set. I mean, this card is almost unbeatable when you put him on the stack.
If your metric is... what is the best card when you cast?
I put a little asterisk on it.
Emrakul. Yep, Emrakul's the best card in the set.
All right, so we agree. Oh, wait. Yeah, no, he's not in this set. But yeah, Ulamog is my pick for bombiest bomb. All right, what was the best common for each color? Now, this one... I decided not to be controversial and disagree with you because I went down your list and I agreed with everyone, especially the last one, which I thought was really funny because I wouldn't have thought of it that way. But when I read it, I thought, yeah, no, he's actually right. So why don't you read your list because that's the one we're going to use here.
For white, I have Gideon's Reproach. Mm-hmm. For blue, I have Clutch of Currents. And I have this one as the best overall common, pick one, pack one.
Okay.
For black, I have Complete Disregard. For red, I have Touch of the Voids. And for green, I have Evolving Wilds.
It's so funny. I was like reading your list and I'm like, yep. And then I'm like, oh, touch. I looked at red. I'm like, no, that's right. And then green, wait a minute. You put a land there, which is, I mean, a little insulting to green, but it's also true.
Yeah. Well, when we were just trying to figure out our pick orders, I remember this before the Pro Tour, we're like, well, Evolving Wilds is a really high pick. And we like ranked it above a lot of commons and then ended up ranking it above all the green commons. It turns out that's just what you want.
Yeah, it is. And it's at a premium too. Those are really hard to find. And interesting
unsurprisingly,
note, yeah, all of these cards are removal spells in some way or another. And the one that we liked the best, which was Clutch of Currents, was the one that was both a removal spell and a threat. So, yeah.
I could completely get behind Touch of the Void being better than Clutch of Currents, by the way. I think some people do think that.
Touch of the Void? Don't you mean Complete Disregard?
No, I mean Touch of the Void.
Really?
Yeah. Because I think red is reasonably better than black.
Than black. Wait a minute. You said Touch of the Void, Clutch of Currents. Did you mean Touch of the Void's better than Complete Disregard?
No, I'm saying some people think Touch of the Void is better than Clutch of Currents, pick one, pack one.
Dear God. Really?
Yeah. I think it's a reasonable thing to think. I would take Clutch because I like being in blue better than I like being in red. But if they were the same color, I could see Touch of the Void just being better. It's 3 mana instead of 5 mana, and it just kills something. So,
God, wow, I have it way lower.
Yeah,
I can see that. I can see what you're saying, though. Going to the dome.
I do think that Clutch is better. I'm just saying that some people like Touch the Void better, and I do not think that's patently ridiculous. If that's what you think, then I think that's reasonable.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Ooh, more controversy. This set never ends, does it? What was the best uncommon?
I see you written Grip of Desolation Lands Down, which was...
you wrote that.
Oh, man, did I break my no trolling thing? That was mild.
You trolled yourself.
Yeah. We'll consider that half. But yeah, Grip of Desolation was... I didn't say no jokes,
Fair.
Grip of Desolation was, I think, even if you think it's close to Rolling Thunder, which again I do not, even if you think it's close, you think Grip of Desolation is better. I don't know anyone who thinks Rolling Thunder is better.
Okay, so there's that. I mentioned, I wanted to put honorable mention Rolling Thunder because I think it saw its stock drop, but a little further than necessary. I think that people looked at it and said, well, it's not quite as good as Grip of Desolation. And I think that they push Rolling Thunder down a little further than it should have gone. You still just lose games to that card pretty consistently. It's still quite good. But I agree. I think Grip is the best uncommon in the set. I do.
Yep.
So, let's get through these ones. Worst card in the set, the biggest blank, the most last picked, however you want to, categorize it.
I have a couple nominees. Lava Step Raider might be the worst card. The 1 mana 1/2 that you can pay 2 in red to give +2/+0.
Yeah,
card is just really bad, and people seem to think it was okay. At least I've played against it a number of times. I just did no synergies whatsoever. It just wasn't devoid or an ally or anything like that.
Right. Goblin Warrior deck.
Hedron Blade was also an incredibly huge blank. This is the +1/+1 equipment that gave you Death Touch if you got blocked by an Eldrazi or a colorless creature. And just the card's just nonsense. I've actually had a lot of people play it against me because it has a lot of text. It's not good. I think the card's very bad.
Agree.
And Dutiful Return is a funny one. This might be the one I last picked the most often. It's the 3-block Raise Dead twice. It's so funny because this card looks like every time I did a draft video or was on stream and I took it, I'm like, I might just slide this in against control. I never sided it in. I cast this card 0 times. I never sided it in. So I'm going to go ahead and at least finally just admit that the card is just not good.
Yeah. And the one I had was Kite Sail Scout. We know this is bad. We called it out in the early stages, but it does look just good enough to inexperienced players that they'll play it, even though it, like Lava Step Raider, has no synergies with really anything in the set. So that, the reason I put it there was just because it has, it's not just that it's just god awful. It's like it looks just good enough, or you might think that it has some synergy and then it just ends up not. This is a fun one. Which card was the most begrudgingly playable? The card that you're just like, oh, fine. I guess I'll end up putting this in my deck, but it was never really the one you wanted in there.
Rush of Ice has to be that card for me. This is the, 4 and a blue tap creature doesn't untap, make a 3/3 awaken card. It kind of got there. I did play it, but I was never super happy to play it. Overall, I think Rush of Ice was, I don't know. Clearly it was playable. I just was never thrilled.
It was a weird card too, right? Because it's just a bad Clutch of Currents, right?
Yes, it's so weird that they're both in the same set.
So
they both make
same.
3/3s and have the same cost. One bounces a creature, one taps a creature. So much worse.
Yeah, very weird to have those right next to each other in the set. Mine was Felidar Cub, right? It didn't actually fit into anything specifically, allies, colorless, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't fly. So it just didn't really do, but it was useful just often enough as, okay, fine. It's a 2-drop. I can play it. And then occasionally it'll take out an enchantment as well. That it ended up making the cut for me, some percentage of the time, but in my blue-white Flyers deck. Or in my ally deck or whatever. It was just one of those things. It's like, this doesn't really fit anywhere, but it holds enough of its own and it's easy enough to cast that it ended up being my okay, fine, I'll throw this cub in there type situation. Now, out of the board, there was times when I would actually be quite happy to have that card, but for whatever reason in this set, it just didn't really fit.
Yeah, Felidar Cub is, in some formats, I think this card is just a very solid, C+. In some formats, it's much less than that, so.
Yeah. Yeah, normally it would be good. Is there any card you're going to miss drafting?
I think Kozilek's Channeler is funny that we were talking about that one earlier. Kozilek Channeler, I know that we say misdrafting, but we're going to see this set next block as well, just because it's good. We're going to have one pack of Battle for Zendikar, but still, the card I'm misdrafting the most is Kozilek's Channeler because of just how good it is at doing a number of different things. It's a mana source to get you to 7 or 8 mana which a lot of decks want, and it's a 4/4, so you don't really flood out because even if you don't need the mana, it's still a 4/4. Just overall, I found the card to be extremely solid and fun to play with.
Yeah, that card's great. I think it's a little underrated too. I alluded to that earlier, but I do think that. Mine was obviously Clutch of Currents. Look, this is just what I want to do, right? I mean, I want to bounce stuff and make creatures. That's kind of the thing that I like to do most. And the other thing I really like about cards like Clutch of Currents is its flexibility. And I think that's something that's easy to overlook, but there are times when you do fire it off for just blue. That's option B by a long stretch, but having that flexibility is really important. And I love it just to find those instances, even if they are rare, when you're going to use a card like that for an effect that isn't as powerful as it could be. Well, it brings us to our next.
Yeah, and see, this is why I tried to vary my answers.
I'm going to let you read this, by the way, because you kind of nailed it. So the next segment is, what was the Marshaliest card ever, and what was the LSVEest card ever? So you take it from here.
First of all, LSV is just mangling of the English language. But for me, I wrote Halimar Tidecaller, which probably not a huge surprise because I talked about this card earlier. It's a build-around. I like build-arounds. It's powerful. I tend to like powerful cards. It does draw cards. It just rewards you for drafting right and does a cool thing and just overall fits very nicely into the decks I like to draft. Marshal. Clutch of Currents. As boring as it is, Marshall just gets the mana every set from now on. There we are.
And I just put, damn, I'm not even changing this, because Luis actually wrote that in for me, and I'm just like, well, yeah, he's right. But it was, I mean, look, that, you know, if there is a card like that in the set, that is going to be the one that I like the most. So there you go. What were our soapboxiest cards? We'll start
I'll let
with
you go first on this one.
Yeah, we'll start with mine. And this one didn't actually come up super often on the show, but it was one that I talked to my friend Adam about, and I did pop up on the show sometimes, which were cards like Titan's Presence and Processor Assault, right? Which is, I try to convey the idea that cards that some percentage of the time are literally uncastable out of your hand have a huge downside, right? And, you know, the tool that we use on the show, we call it BCSM, best case scenario mentality, where your brain will automatically look at a card and register it as the scenario in which it's awesome. You'll be like, Titan's Presence. Oh my God, I can kill almost anything. Processor Assault. Dude, 2 mana for 5 damage. Holy crap. But the truth of the matter is that you have to look at it as a spectrum, and you have to look at it in its average case scenario. And these cards are very tough to do that on, because their worst case scenario is literally uncastable, which is, God, that's super, super, super tough pill to swallow. And their best case scenario is very good, right? Like efficient removal spells, which is something that we just don't really get anymore. And so these are the ones that I definitely talked to him about, and talked a little bit on the show as well, as just trying to get people's mentality right about grading and assessing a card that you sometimes just can't cast, which is a really big downside that people have to take into account.
My card is on the other side of it, which was Dampening Pulse. Again, a card I've talked about. And the reason I want to talk about this card is because I think people let, I guess, the wrong reasons make them, or give, They make decisions about cards for the wrong reasons, and -1/-1 looks like a minor effect. I will agree to that. I've definitely fallen into that exact trap before. But the reason, and I've said this the whole time, the reason I think this card is good is because I played with this effect before with, was it Umberstone, or Cumberstone in Shards of Alara block, and then the blue-black 3/3/4 in also Shards of Alara, I believe. Or no, that was Dragon's Maze. But both those cards had this effect, and I was like, and both times that those cards came out, it's just like, wow, this card is just absurd. Use the past to help you, and I know a lot of people weren't playing during those times, so I can't blame them for that. But also try cards when you don't know enough about a card to evaluate it. The best way to evaluate it is to play it. And I feel like a lot of people saw Dampening Pulse, looked at the effect, thought it looked too minor for 4 mana, didn't put it in their deck, and didn't realize how good it was.
Yeah, good soapbox. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you?
I don't literally have to read it, but I still get it wrong. So it's Malakir Familiar. This is the 2 black for a 2/1 flying death touch. When you gain life, it gets ++1 until end of turn. Now, for whatever reason, the first time I saw this card, I immediately slotted into, when you gain life, this gets a ++1 counter, because that's how Bloodbond Vampire works. Mm-hmm. And this is actually part of my dissatisfaction with the set, is having cards that are so similar but still different in a meaningful way. It just really messes with your head. And I just think this card gets counters. Multiple times I've treated it as if it does. I've reviewed it as if it does. I've talked about it in game, or thought about it in game as if it does. And to this day, when I see the card, I have an immediate instinct of, yep, this gets a ++1 counter. I know it doesn't do that.
You have to correct it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I have the same scenario, but it's for Grove Tender Druids, which again, I don't know how these concepts get mixed up in our heads, but I always think it triggers off of landfall and not rally. Now, there's a big difference there when it comes to spitting out 1/1s, but for whatever reason, when I'm playing in a game and my opponent has Grove Tender Druids, because I'll tell you what, I never do. I'll be like, I just never end up playing those colors, but I'll always think like, they're going to play a land, make a plant. So I need to be able to block and do it's just like, no, they have to come up with a whole ally and still have the mana left over. So yeah, Grove Tender Druids is my, have to read it card for the set. This is always a fun one. What was your most drafted card on Magic Online? Cause that, when you draft in real life, the cards end up disappearing, but on Magic Online, you can just look.
For me, my initial guess was Kozilek's Channeler, and I thought it was going to be a colorless card so it has Kozilek's Channeler beats Rune Processor by 1. We've got 55 Kozilek's Channelers, 54 Rune Processors, and then Clutch of Currents is third at 40.
Ooh, Clutch. That's very nice. Mine were, I don't have the numbers because I had them spread across a couple of accounts, but Stonehaven Medic was my number 1. And Clutch of Currents was number 2, and number 3 was Terminate.
That makes sense. This is Tightening Coils, of course.
Yeah. So those are the ones that I drafted. One of the things you notice
when you look at most drafted cards, it's the intersection of cards you like, cards that are powerful, but also cards that aren't like obvious first picks. So it's impressive that we had Clutch of Currents so high because you never get one of them like 7th pick, or at least you very rarely do.
Yeah, it indicates that we effectively never passed them.
Right. Whereas cards like Stonehaven Medic, Tightening Coils, even like Ruin Processor, you can easily wheel. And these are cards that it makes sense that we have a lot of them because we like them a lot and they're not like obvious first picks. But the fact that we both have Clutch of Currents as our like second and third respectively is pretty impressive.
It shows our dedication. Yeah. And Stonehaven Medic being my number 1 most drafted card is certainly an indication of that, as well as it shows, at least for me, it shows me that I really like the Blue-White Flyers deck, right? Because that's a card that you can play in that deck sometimes. And that means I was picking it a little bit higher than most people. Okay, this is a big one, Luis. This is, we've got a couple of big points to make before we sign off on this show. So let's get into this. This is a big one. I'm going to kind of let you go on this one. This is from a design and development perspective. How did this set fare? How are the mechanics? What were some of the wins? What were some of the losses? And, this is where we get to kind of look at it. And this is where I lean on you to kind of put your game designer hat on and let us know what you thought of the set.
So, and even though I am, I do some work as a game designer, I don't want to come at it from completely that perspective because I'm first and foremost a Magic player when it comes to my interaction with Magic. So I'm going to try to temper it from my point of view as a Magic player, even though I have some amount of background.
Even though your full-time job every single day is to being a game designer. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Duly noted.
Well,
you're understating it a little bit. I mean, this is what you do for a living.
True, it's one of the things I do. I spend a lot of time doing a lot of things.
That is a good point.
So, what I want to speak to first is green. I don't think anyone, including the people who designed the set, are happy that green is so bad. It's not an intentional thing. I'm pretty confident in saying that. And there's a couple reasons why having green be as far behind the other colors as it is bad. One is that people who like green feel bad because some people like green, and when you're told repeatedly green is terrible, you shouldn't draft green, that's going to take away some of your enthusiasm for the set. The other is that even though draft is self-correcting, and draft certainly works, it's not broken when one of the colors isn't draftable. You can still, BFZ is still a great set to draft. It's better if all the colors have good reasons to draft them. That leads to, I think, more interesting decisions in draft than there just being, 4.25 colors, even if you don't think it's just 4. Whereas having green be unplayable just eliminates a lot of those decisions. Also, people who draft green unwittingly, because there's a lot of people who will draft a set, 1 to 3 times.
A lot of people. A lot of our listeners, too.
And imagine going to Friday Night Magic or a local draft at a store, say a month and a half into the set, where a lot of people have drafted the set for a long time. You draft green because it seems plausible. I drafted green my first draft. Obviously, I didn't know any better. And then everyone's like, wow, green sucks. Why did you draft green? Everyone knows green's unplayable. And then you go like 1, 2, or 03, and you just... When you want to draft again, it doesn't sound very pleasant. Mm-hmm. And that's like one of those hidden traps that it's really hard to tell, because one of the assumptions people make when they open a pack is that all the colors are plausible. And this set kind of didn't build around that. So I think that green being so far behind is unfortunate. One that bugged me a lot is allies, or more specifically that the Allies were not distinct by art, and I know that there's some like structural reasons that why they ended up having to be more like logistical reasons, I guess. But yeah, when you have Stonehaven Medic next to, you know, core Blade Whirl, why is one an ally and one isn't? Or when you have Kite Sail Scout, I know that these fly, but sure, these are all these like 1 to 2 mana cores, that core creature types that some are allies and some aren't. Or you've got multiple vampires that care about life gain, and some are allies and some aren't. And that's pretty tough to try to figure out, you know? Like, it stops your intuitive understanding of what's going on. And that kind of, even though I will fully admit, as a player, I know what all the creature types are now, and it does not bother me in the slightest, and it hasn't since the first week of the format or so. I know this is a stumbling block for a lot of people. I've had people not know that Angel of Renewal is an ally, because, again, this is just, there's no through line in terms of allies and art and what creature types. And that might have helped balance the set. I believe it did. I think that's the reason that Angel is an ally and Kite Sail Scout or Stonehaven Medic aren't. So, and that makes the gameplay better. But I know that is, you know, it's a thing that does cause a little bit more brain burningness when you're looking at the board. Yeah,
and I think, you know, when you look at, you know, speaking of what we do for a living, this is part of what you and I do for a living is think about this stuff and talk about it on the show. And it was hard for us, right? Yeah. It was like we had to kind of piece together as we went, well, you know, what's the logic behind which cards, you know, fall under certain categories? And that wasn't clear. And it just ended up being that you had to memorize it, or there was a couple little hints here and there. Oh, these ones have flying or whatever. But yeah, that's tough. That's a tough, you know, that's another little road bump on the way to enjoying the set.
And then allies, this has nothing to do with anything but the fact that green wasn't good, is that the multicolor ally deck didn't quite get there for like 2 reasons. One is that I think green is so poor and that cut out a lot of its support. And the other is that mana fixing isn't quite there. I think the set is just a little short on mana fixing. And it's got Evolving Wilds, Fertile Thicket, and 2 mediocre green commons, Lifespring Druid and Natural Connection. And then it's got Pilgrim's Eye uncommon, but it's got Converge and multicolor ally decks as themes. So those kind of didn't mesh well for me. I mean, yeah, it's part of the puzzle that you're supposed to third pick Evolving Wilds, and that's fine. But I think formats are hurt more when mana fixing is too low than are hurt when mana fixing is too high. So I would rather lean on the side of more fixing, and I think this leaned pretty heavily on the side of low fixing. You know, the good news is all those things didn't detract from the fact that this is a very strong draft format. There's a lot of good things going on here too. One is that the Devoid and Ingest mechanics I think played out really well. Eldrazi felt like Eldrazi from like a, you know, flavor / cohesion perspective, and mechanically, Devoid and Ingest and Processing all overlapped in nice ways. Like you said, you had the Grixis Shard of Eldrazi, you know, blue, black, and red. It contained multiple Eldrazi decks that felt different because they were mechanically different, but also overlapped in ways that felt good. And I like that you could draft various combinations of these decks and end up being pretty happy with where they ended up. I think the Eldrazi were a hit. I was skeptical of the Devoid keyword, but I do think it worked. So
yeah,
I would consider this a win.
I think so too. You know, they wanted to fix the Eldrazi too, I think. You know, the ones from Rise of the Eldrazi had this feeling that if you did get to the point where you could cast one, it was very difficult to come back from even the common, you know, from a Crusher or whatever. And these ones didn't have that feeling. They felt like, okay, I'm under a lot of pressure. If I do nothing, I will lose to this card. But I can do something and still play a game afterwards, which is I think much better. I think it's just better if, you know, I want really powerful spells and I want the Eldrazi to be really powerful, but I don't necessarily want the common one to end the game on the spot. Like that's a little too much. Right. So I think they dialed that back down correctly.
I also like Awaken. I think the Awaken keyword is almost everything I look for in a keyword. It makes it so if you get flooded, you have outs. It does reward good resource management. I mean, if you awaken too much and your lands die, you can all of a sudden can't cast your spells. You also have the decision of, do you double awaken on the same land? Do you awaken on a different land? Playing around Awaken is interesting. Overall, Awaken was just fun to play with, fun to play against. There's just a very, very good design, I believe.
And powerful. I like that.
Yeah. Synergy is, I think, a really big part of why I liked Battle for Zendikar. This format was very high on synergy. And actually, you know, me and Brian Wong were talking on Twitter the other day about what is the number one predictor of us liking a format and drafting a lot of times. And for both of us, it's, do the build around uncommons get there? And those are kind of a shorthand for how much synergy is in the set. Battle for Zendikar is really high on that scale. It's got some decks like Blue-White Flyers that don't take knowledge of synergy to draft, and I think that is good for reasons you identified earlier, that, it's a good handhold, and it's just fun to draft decks that just have good cards. But the synergy decks are so good. What I live for, what I draft for, is cards that change in value based on what you already have or what you expect to get.
Yeah.
The fact that you can first pick Colostrum Healer and feel like it's a win, and see one of 3 cards in the pack and not be interested in it, that's a win. Draft formats where you could just rank every card on power level and you just take them in that order, those are not interesting to me. Origins was like that. I did not draft a lot of Origins. And I think Battle for Zendikar is so much on the synergy side that I enjoy drafting it, and I drafted it a lot. And I think that leads to my next point, which is overall, the gameplay is just fantastic. I think I can give this an unqualified A on gameplay. The fact that just a lot of the cards were modal, you had cards like Valakut Invoker, Kozilek's Channeler, Awaken cards, the various Eldrazi Scions, all those added up to really good gameplay, and I've drafted this set the most since Cons. Again, there are some things which I think could have improved the set a lot. I went over some, I think, very real criticisms, but at the end of the day, the proof's in the pudding, and I enjoy the gameplay of this set. So I'm not saying it's for everyone. I think that there are valid reasons to not like it. Like if you wanted to draft allies, or you like drafting green, or maybe synergy formats are a little bit intimidating, or you just don't enjoy them. The set was really high on one of those and low on the other. But for me, I think the set is overall a success. I enjoy drafting it, and I look forward to drafting Oath of the Gatewatch. If it's anything like, the good parts of Battle for Zendikar, then I'm glad to go into it.
No, that was a great summation of the set. Putting on my game designer hat for a minute, which is not very big. Going to the gameplay that you described.
Your head is fairly large.
So yeah, so that's the problem. Is that it doesn't cover. Yeah. So, but one of the things that I really appreciated about the gameplay, and I think they really nailed, was the mana sink aspect, right? The fact that so many cards had these dual roles. When we played Khans of Tarkir, and that was my first time playing morphs in a regular draft set, I loved them. I absolutely loved playing with them because they gave you these cards had this sort of dual purpose, and morphs even have, kind of a third purpose or whatever, but, where you could play them early or play them late, or you could play them early and then flip them up late. And with this set, we had cards like Awaken, we had a few Invokers laying around, we had some Eldrazi. And it gives you stuff to do with that mana. And for whatever reason, I find that sets that have a lot of cards in them that do something early, but also do something late are awesome. They tend to make my experience so much better because there's so many more things to decide. It's always planning out and figuring out, well, how can I get the most out of this? Or do I need to just bite the bullet and just play this card now? And even though this set didn't actually have morphs in it, it had a similar feel to me where I could do things early and then I could do things late. And there was, instead of drawing your 2-drop on turn 10 and being like, here's my 2-drop, go, it doesn't do anything. Now it's an Invoker that all of a sudden is a threat, maybe. And then there's these risk assessments that you need to take on if you want to dump 8 mana into this thing and have it killed or whatever. And I love that stuff. I really think that they nailed that aspect of it, giving us stuff to do with our mana at different points in the game. And I hope that's something that they continue to hit up in the future. What did the format teach you? How did this format make us better at Limited? What are the takeaways from the format? This is kind of the part of the show where we look back on it and say, well, what do we, did we learn anything from this set? And if so, what are we taking away?
We learned that blue was open.
Yeah.
All right. That's the number one thing. The number two is that, this format got us back into Synergy World. I talked earlier about, both how much synergy was in the set and how it makes it hard to initially evaluate cards like Mist Intruder. And we're back in the land where the cards you take matter when, in how they interact with other cards. So it was refreshing to get back to that. And it was fun drafting again a set where you really had to concentrate on where you were heading and why, which was less true in a lot of the other sets, like almost every other set we had this year. So It was, getting me back in that mindset was awesome. I look forward to using that for the next format here. I think it's going to still be very much in that world. Another thing this format taught us is that sometimes one of the colors is really, really bad. Like, it has happened in sets before. It's not like this is the first time this ever happened, but green being this bad really did adjust how you draft. Because in normal sets, sometimes you're like, well, this card I opened is an 8, but I'll take a 7 over it because I like this other color better. This is a format where, well, this green card opens a 9, but I'm going to take a 5 over it because it's green. And that's just very different than normal. So it's kind of interesting being back into that, or being in that spot.
Yeah, it was kind of cool actually to have that thrown into the works, right? Like
it wasn't just downside.
Yeah, it actually forced us to view a format in a little bit of a different way. For me, one of the things that I had alluded to earlier and I wanted to talk about here was, this set definitely gave us some reminders about not leaning too hard on the known tropes that we use for limited. These are the types of cards that we see over and over and over again printed in a limited set. I'll often use previous cards as a gauge for how good the next version of that type of card is. The common red burn spell in a set, the green bear with some upside, the black removal spell or whatever. And these are, it can be easy to categorize these if they don't look that much different than what you've seen. And while this can be a useful tool, you also have to be wary of overvaluing it or overusing it. The case in point for this set, or a really good one, was Unnatural Aggression, which I talked about earlier, right? Which, even green aside, it wasn't nearly as good as the other fight spells we've had in the past. And, I think when I saw it, I thought, well, all right, I'm just going to pencil this one as a solid fight card in green and kind of move on with my life. And, it took me a little while to finally realize that no, this card's actually just not good. Like, it's not even just the green isn't good. It's just this card isn't very good. And part of that, of course, is the fact that it's green. And part of that is what you mentioned earlier, Luis, that the creatures that it will often be, setting up the fight for on your side weren't really that huge in relation to the other stuff. And, other points that I've brought up throughout the set, like the fact that this is an Eldrazi set. And if you're a deck that wants a big finisher, you can find one for colorless, where that makes green a little worse anyway, because green's, normal bag is they get the big, think of the Hydra or whatever. That kind of card would be pretty big in a normal set, and it would be bigger than almost anything. But here, your blue-white opponent can just play something that's just straight up bigger than that Hydra for at least a few turns. And, so that made it worse too. But the key here, and the thing that I'm taking away from it, is that I put it in the bucket, right? I used my shortcut, which is, I think, the correct thing to do, but I needed to go a little deeper this time and really look at Unnatural Aggression and say, is this what we want to do? How is this different from the previous versions? And I think had I done that, I would have been able to sniff out a little ahead of time of, this could be good, but I'm really going to keep my eye on it. Where I didn't. I was like, it's good and that's it. And then green got bad and I thought, well, then Unnatural Aggression is probably not that good. And then, I think maybe I was talking to you and you were like, well, the card's just bad. And I'm just thinking to myself, God, actually the card is just bad. Like, how did this happen? This is a fight card. These are supposed to be good. And again, I think the lesson learned is don't lean too hard on, well, it's a red burn spell, so it has to be good. It probably is, but it might not be. And you need to look closely at it. And it also taught me some weird lessons about balance and how it relates to fun. This set didn't feel that balanced to me. Right. For a lot of the reasons that you described up above, the color imbalance, some of the archetypes. I mean, I think I drafted 2 ally decks the whole entire time or something. And all of a sudden now it's all about these, colorless decks and the decks that we like. But you know what? It's weird. It was still fun. I really enjoyed drafting this set, and I would draft, like, if the cube wasn't on Magic Online, I would draft it today. No questions asked. I would jump in, no problem. And I gotta say, when things started to look out of whack from both an archetypes and also a color perspective, I thought to myself, well, this could be bad, right? This could be a set that I end up being like, it's just too, the balance isn't there. And now everybody's fighting over the same colors and it just made the set not fun. And that just isn't the case. The set was actually really fun. And before this set, I thought that those things were more closely linked. I thought that, the balance of the set was very indicative of how much fun I would have in it. And it turns out it's not. Maybe it's the gameplay. I don't know. But for whatever reason, one of my takeaways from the set is that, those things are not necessarily linked together.
Yeah. One big takeaway for me is that green, one of the biggest questions going into the next set is, where's green? Because we're going to draft a format which has 2 packs of With the Gatewatch, 1 pack of Battle for Zendikar. What that means, and this is my initial analysis, and trust me, we're going to revisit this topic, is if let's say in Oath of the Gatewatch, green is exactly as good as all the other colors, green becomes a draftable color once again. Since having 2 packs of average green plus 1 pack of very much below average green is still a draftable color. So we're going to see where that ends up, because green is, again, worse in this format than you would have thought, but it is very interesting to see where that's going to end up. So that as a takeaway is definitely something good. Just keep your eye on where green is. All
right. Big question at the end. Favorite card of the format? I'm going to let you go first, Luis. What's your favorite card?
I got to just say Halimar Tidecaller. I just had so much fun with this card. And looping Clutch of Currents on Halimar Tidecaller, like continuously bouncing the Tidecaller, is just so fun.
Is there any better feeling?
There really isn't.
It's so good. Especially when they have flying. It's just dumb. My favorite card? Hedron Archive. Yeah, I'm throwing a little curveball at you. Obviously, Clutch of Currents is my actual favorite, but Hedron Archive, was because the thing is that, I think most people can appreciate a good Man of War type effect, but Clutch of Currents got too popular for me. So I'm going hipster on it, and I'm like, yeah, that was so yesterday. Hedron Archive is a card that I loved in this format. I felt like it opened up a lot of doors. It was very rarely awful. The aggressive decks weren't really good enough to punish you super hard for playing a Hedron Archive, and it opened up the ability to truly ramp out some huge, impressive, colorless threats, thanks to this being an Eldrazi set. I love that. And then the fact that you could cash it in for 2 cards was huge. I mean, drawing cards is it's a very powerful thing, but it's so much better when you attach it to a useful ability like a Hedron Archive. And I loved that card. It went up and up and up and up for me on my, where I pick it rankings, and it moved all the way up to, second pick, first pick, third pick, whatever. I would take a Hedron Archive. I just think the card's fantastic. And it's a card that when I had it early in a draft, it made me the happiest. I remember thinking like, this is great. I can play something huge, but if I don't, I'll draw some cards. And, going back to what I mentioned earlier about the, mana sinks, I mean, this thing enabled that. Kozilek's Channeler along the same lines too. So Hedron Archive, that's my number 1 card for the format. This is a fun set.
It really was.
A lot going on.
I'm really happy with how the set turned out.
Yeah. I am too. And I don't know that I think when things started to get a little shaky, I was thinking, I admit I got a little worried, but it kind of came through and really taught me a lot. That's going to do it for the show this week though, as we, we wave at Battle for Zendikar. It's not quite leaving yet. We get to still draft battle cards and they're going to be around, but this is where we kind of put our stamp on it. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the show at lrcast.com. If you want to send us something a little longer, you can send us an email, lr@lrcast.com. I also want to remind you that the show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. Make sure you check out Channel Fireball for Oath of the Gatewatch pre-orders. You can get in there and get the stuff that you want. It'll show up on your door the earliest they can ship it to you, which is awesome. And also, of course, I always like to mention this, but free content, right? If you want to get better at Magic, go to Channel Fireball, watch videos, read articles by some of the best players in the world, and you will improve. And I know you want to get better because you're here listening to this podcast. And and there's stuff there that will help you do that. I swear to God. And it's all free every day on Channel Fireball. That will do it for the show this week and the Battle for Zendikar Sunset show. But next week, we're going to start ramping up towards Oath of the Gatewatch, and this is going to shake things up. We're going to, Luis mentioned a minute ago, we're going to be talking a lot about what changes, and I'm going to tell you, from what I've seen so far, a lot is going to change. So we're going to be tracking that and keeping you as up to date as possible. Thanks so much for a great year here on Limited Resources. It's been a super, super fun time for me, and I know Luis has had a good time as well. And we look forward to 2016 with you as we all improve on our journey with Magic. We'll see you next week.
And because it's the new year, because we're recording on the 1st even, I think it's a good time to talk about New Year's resolutions.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got a couple. First off, a slight word on New Year's resolutions. I kind of don't believe in New Year's resolutions as like a big thing. I think it's useful to like look forward to what you want to do, and this is as good a time as any, but I'm not one of those people who goes all out on like, here are my resolutions. I'm going to feel really bad if I don't hit them, or I'm going to, make these grand plans. But I think laying out my goals for the next year, perfectly reasonable. So, my first one is just kind of be more focused and mindful while playing Magic. I've been playing a lot of Magic recently because, I had this last week off and I've been streaming a ton. And I feel like I've been kind of scatterbrained while playing the games. Part of it is that streaming is I'm talking the whole time. I'm interacting with chat. I'm often double queuing. But even then, like I feel like at live events when I'm obviously not double queuing, I could be more focused. I could be a little bit more patient and not just play the first thing that I think about every time. And it really got to me last Saturday when I was playing in the mocks. And I went 8-2 and I got 11th. And one of my losses was to clicking through my attack step, which is just a stupid mistake. And the other was a really complicated board with an interesting decision that I think I ultimately got wrong. I actually put it up as a what's the play on Channel 5, but we're going to link to it in the show notes. And that was just like, I looked at it. I came to a conclusion. I don't think it was the right conclusion. And I think I could have gotten to the right conclusion. I just wasn't quite there. I don't know. So my resolution is to just be a little bit more focused and mindful while playing. Another is to travel less. I think I'm going to do less travel this year. I'm still going to go play at Pro Tours, and I'm still going to go do coverage at GPs, and I'm still going to go play at team GPs, but I think you're going to see me at not very many individual GPs as a player. It doesn't really meet any of my goals, and that's what we're talking about right now, because the two things that GPs would really, what I would want them to help me with is get to Worlds as a player or become Platinum, and without a good PT finish, that's just not realistic. So if I don't do well at a PT, then I don't think I'm gonna, go to a lot of individual GPs. That being said, I know I'm doing coverage at least 3 GPs next year, starting with GP Oakland, and I'm definitely gonna be playing in the team Grand Prix that come along and the Pro Tour. So it's not like I'm taking a huge step back here. I'm just trying to make sure that I use my limited travel points in judicious places.
What percentage do you think you're going to hit that goal? Because I know you.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, I need a home weekend. And then sometimes you'll get a little antsy and you see everybody's gearing up to go. And it's like, oh, Luis is going.
Yeah.
Which, look, I'm not trying to paint that in a bad light because I like it. When you show up for a GP, it makes it better for me. But, is that the kind of thing that you're like, no, I'm really serious about buckling down and not? Or is it kind of like, we'll see type scenario?
It's more of a we'll see, I believe, but I think depending on what happens this year, it could be more than that. Well, again, okay. We'll see.
All right.
And the flip side of that, though, is that I'm going to stream more. I already have. The last month or two, I've streamed at least a couple times a week. This last week, I think I've literally streamed 7 days in a row or something like that, maybe more. I guess one of the days I was just on Paul's stream. But my goal is to stream around 2 times a week. Couldn't go over that, but I would like to at least hit the 2 times a week benchmark, and I think I'm going to hit that. I like streaming. I've had a lot of fun streaming. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the interaction, and that's a good way for me to play Magic and be connected to Magic and have a lot of fun while doing so. But not having to leave my house to do it is a big draw for me. So,
dude, your stream's been super fun too.
I really loved them.
Yeah, it has just been. I mean, it's been roller coaster rides, and but it's always entertaining. It's always fun watching you play. You bring that same, for people that have watched Luis's draft videos. It has that same vibe where he's doing some sweet stuff, but he's also playing well. You're learning something. You're having fun with it, and you get to ride along. And this time, you actually get to ask him questions too. Yeah, if you haven't really delved into the area of Twitch.tv and the streams that happen there, you could do a lot worse than starting off with Luis's stream. It gives you an idea of the level of fun you can have watching somebody else play. And also the vibe it's like hanging out with you, right? Like it feels like you're just sort of hanging out with Luis rather than just passively watching somebody play Magic. Instead, it's a more interactive kind of like, oh, this is what I'm doing this afternoon. I got a draft up on one screen, and and Luis is drafting, and I don't know. I think that you've hit a really nice stride with it, and I think the viewership numbers seem to support that as well, because you have a hell of a lot of people watching you play, and I think that's a sweet goal. I really hope you can keep that one up for sure. Yeah,
having a lot of viewers and a lot of positive viewers. I think part of it is my chat's pretty heavily modded, but I think that's great. Basically, it is hanging out. The idea is to hang out, have fun, be positive, and having a lot of people there enjoying it is definitely one of the motivations. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy playing Magic, and getting to do both at the same time is pretty fun. I would also encourage you to check out Marshall's stream. I've had a lot of fun watching your stream too. I've gotten to watch more during the holidays because then I actually get to stay up late. But
Yeah.
normally you're on the night shift, the graveyard shift even, and I don't get to watch your 2 a.m. streams.
Yeah, no, we have fun on that too. That's very, very chill. I try to use those. I discovered streaming, for me was very stressful at first because I viewed it as basically doing a live draft video. And the draft videos that I do, I try to explain my actions. I view them as fun, but also trying to, help people level up a little bit or whatever. And I realized that was just too much stress when everybody's watching and stuff. And so I took a cue from Kenji, honestly. And he's so much more laid back. He kind of embraces his mistakes, and I talked to him about it and he told me, no, it's about entertainment. Like, I'm not trying to be the number one best player. He's like, I'm trying to play well, but like, whatever, and the truth of the matter is that makes it a lot more fun. So when I do the stream, I bring my buddy Woody on and we just hang out. And I don't care. In fact, I'll put a link. We had a really funny scenario that I cut out as a highlight on Twitch that is just it has to be the biggest train wreck disaster of a turn I've ever played or seen in my entire life. And it's like 8 minutes of just nonsense that Woody and I did. And I'll put a link to that. But anyway, I digress. I'm glad to hear that you're going to be streaming more.
Do you have any New Year's resolutions?
I do. I have a couple. One of them is along the lines of yours with the travel less. I'm going to be doing less coverage this year. That's just by nature of the fact that Wizards is just doing less coverage this year. There was an announcement made by the head of organized play, Hélène Bergeau, and they said that they're going to be kind of restructuring how they cover Grand Prix and such. And so that means a little less travel for me, which I'm welcoming that. It's not that it's great news, but it's not bad news. For me, I traveled a lot last year, and it definitely starts to get to me when I feel like I'm falling a little behind on home stuff, on podcast stuff, and it can be kind of tough to fit things in. And so I think my schedule is going to be a little bit more conducive to that next year. And so I'm okay with that. I'm looking for balance, basically. When I quit my job a few years ago to do Magic stuff, I mean, I was playing poker, but, besides that, I didn't have, a steady income. And so when somebody came up to me and said, hey, we'd like you to do this, I said, yes, period. Like, cause I just didn't feel like I was in a position to, turn that down. Yeah. You and I live very similar lives in that way.
Yeah. We definitely had a long conversation about when you don't know, whether the work's going to be there next year. And, in this case, you honestly have that exact scenario, right?
Yes.
We're cutting down on coverage next year.
Yes. And it's funny because you and I talked about that a couple of weeks before the announcement. And it was like, yep.
Yeah. When you don't know what your work situation is going to be like in a year, it makes it really hard to turn down, decent work. And both of us, I think, have had a little bit of a reluctance to do that. We're both kind of workaholics in that sense, which is funny for someone who plays Magic all the time. But, that is kind of where we're coming from. And yeah, I definitely support you in that. It is hard to do.
It is tough to do. The other thing that I wanted to say about New Year's resolutions is more in terms of advice rather than something for myself. And because I think that coming into a new year is an important time of year where it kind of urges you to reflect on the past and also look forward to the future. And, a lot of what we talk about on Limited Resources is about self-improvement, right? And it usually comes in the form of getting better at Magic. But as many of our listeners have told us over the years, a lot of these principles do apply to things that aren't Magic. Sometimes real life stuff, sometimes other games, and there's a lot to be taken from it. And so for me, when it comes time to look at New Year's resolutions, I try to be hard on myself with it. And what I mean by that is, it's really easy, I think, for somebody to come up and say, I would like to do this more. I'd like to read more books. I'd like to exercise more. I'd like to find a new job or learn a new skill. And I think that that's noble. I think that, there are a lot of people in the world that don't have that urge at all. And I think it's a noble thing to say, I want to improve myself. I want to be better. But I think that I would ask our listeners to demand more of themselves than that. And the advice that I would give you is something that I actually have talked to John Laux a lot about, which is that if you want to change something in your life, you have to be willing to change. And that's a really simple sentence that's pretty easily dismissed, to be honest, but it's true. And what I mean by that is the simple act of saying, I'd like to read more books or exercise or whatever, isn't enough. It's not. You can't just have the desire to do something. you need to be willing to look at your schedule, your life, the way that things are structured, and ask yourself, what am I going to change? And that's really hard. People do not change easily. That much is true. I think we've seen that borne out over the years of history, really, that people just do not change easily. And most people find kind of a comfortable place and they stick with it. But the truth of the matter is that if you want to improve at things and you want to change things, you need to get active about what you're going to change. And that's the best piece of advice I can give you for New Year's resolutions, is to hold yourself to that standard. And that way you're getting specific and you're saying, this is the thing in my life that I'm going to give up so that I can read more books, right? When I get a little sleepy, I'm going to bed. I'm not going to watch another hour of TV. I want to get up earlier in the day. Well, what are you giving up to do that? Because you saying to yourself,
do you really want to get up?
I do not. No, absolutely
okay,
not. That was totally rhetorical. But for the things that are important to people, and I'll give you an example of it, is for me, one goal that I'm setting for this next year is I want to learn computer programs a lot better than I know them currently. Okay. One of them is Adobe Illustrator, because I've always liked doing stuff like that. And I want to be able to do more graphical stuff for the podcasts and streams and that kind of stuff. And the other one is Adobe Premiere, which is a video editing program that I'm actually pretty comfortable in, but that goes very, very deep. And I want to know, can I make high quality video stuff at some point if that's something that I want to do? And so what I've done is I've mapped it out. Right. And look, I think a lot of people would just say, I want to get better at these programs. I'll do something about that, and be like, cool, pat myself on the back, have a drink and go to bed. And there's my New Year's resolution. But I know that doesn't work for me. So what I've done is I've carved out time, and I've got, when I'm home, when I'm not traveling, I have a schedule that is rough, but it entails setting aside an hour a day. And what I did is I signed up for a website, and there's a website that has a whole bunch of instructional videos that I signed up for. I'm paying a monthly fee for it now, but I can now take a course in my time to get better at this stuff. And I've got a certain section of my day that is now set aside to do that, and I'm going to do it. My success rate is going to vary as much as anybody else's, but the truth of it is that I'm giving up an hour of my afternoon where I could be doing other things, like doing a draft or going to play basketball, to learn these skills. And that's the step that I think you need to take. So again, the advice is, if you want to change something in your life, what are you willing to change? And ask yourself that question and make the change. And I think you're going to be a lot happier for it. All right. That's going to do it though, for Luis's sign off.
Sure. I'll let you close us out.
Yeah. Cause I kind of hijacked it there. Sorry.
Is one of your resolutions to monologue longer?
Yeah, no, it isn't.
Because you're succeeding wildly.
No, I know. And that is not what I was trying to do. But I did feel like that was an important point. And sometimes the soapbox has to come out when there's important stuff to be said. But yeah, that'll do it for the show this week. I am Luis Scott-Vargas, signing off.